Our gospel today has a rather bold statement in it. It's a statement that we may not even pay much attention to because we've heard it so many times. We are used to Jesus saying, "I am the light of the world." He says that in the Gospel of St. John. But notice, today's gospel does not say, "I am," but Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth." That means you, Greg. That means you. And you, Lucy. It means Terry back there. It means Maria. It means each and every one of us. It means me. You and I are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. If we are living as disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ, that is our calling. We are called to be light and salt to the world around us. And that means we must do what salt does. Salt flavors. Salt preserves. You and I are called to give purpose and meaning to the world in which we live. You and I are called to preserve the world from falling into the traps of evil. Light illuminates. It shows us the way. You and I are called to illuminate the world around us so that people know the way they should walk, how they can be gathered into the kingdom of our Father. If you and I are living as Christ has called us to live, if we are living as disciples, then we are light and salt to the world around us. If we go to the first reading today, it talks about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless. And what it's really saying to us is that we are to be generous with the gifts that God has given us. It is that generosity that you and I are called to. And yet, for me, for you, generosity comes very hard. It's much easier for us to focus on what I want, what I need, what makes me comfortable, what gives me pleasure, what satisfies my desires. And yet, you and I are called to be generous. And we are called to be generous because God has been generous to us. I'd like to focus that today on our generosity toward the church. Our generosity toward carrying out the mission of the Lord Jesus Christ to bring the faith to the corners of the world. And first of all, I want to talk about that in relationship to our generosity with our time. Increasingly, it is very difficult to get people to be involved in religious formation, teaching others the faith. In this parish is particularly difficult. It's like we don't have the time now to be generous with our time so that we can form others in the faith. And yet that is what we're called to do. It's hard to find people to serve on committees. It's hard to find people to take up special projects, things that we should be known for as a Christian people. We all say, "Oh, I'm so busy. My life is so hectic." And I know that's true. And yet, I have to wonder if it's always that busyness or if it's how we choose to spend our time. Think about it for a moment. You know, services like Netflix are doing really well. We have time for that. The social media is flourishing. We have time for that. We have time for professional sports and college sports, even when our families are not involved. And so we have time. It's, do we choose to use that time selfishly, or do we choose to use that time generously? You and I are called to be generous. That also applies to the way we use our money. Once again, we're called to generosity. What's easiest for us to do is to use our money for the things I want, the things that are convenient for me, the things I would enjoy. And yet, we are called to share with what God has given to us. Because God gives to us not just for ourselves, but so that we can share with others, that we can be generous to others. You know, ours is a God of love. Ours is a God who has been generous with us. And if we wish to enter into the kingdom of heaven, we must also learn to be generous. If we do not overcome our selfishness, then we can't enter into the kingdom of heaven. Generosity is a requirement for us in order to enter into the presence of God. Probably this week, I'm not sure exactly when it's going to come, you're going to get a letter from the bishop for that Vibrant Ministries appeal that we saw a video on a few weeks ago, right before Christmas. And in that letter, the bishop will be asking you to support the essential ministries of our diocese. You notice I said you. I didn't say we. And the reason I said that was because I got my letter already. About end of September. And all the priests in the diocese got their letter first, asking us to be supportive of this appeal. And I think maybe with maybe one or two exceptions, every priest has done that. But now it's your turn. I also said essential ministries. You know, there are things we as a church must do. We must provide for religious formation, and that means we must provide resources for those who teach. We must try to promote family life and marriage stability. We must have services for people like mothers who are unwed, people who suffer from addictions, people who are seeking adoption. Those are services that we have an obligation to provide. And yet the only resources we have is the resources that come from us, the people. Now, when you get your letter, there's going to be an amount in that letter that is a suggested donation. Now, I want to make that clear that is not an expectation. It is more of a challenge. The The bishop is not asking you to impoverish yourself. He's just asking you to make a sacrificial gift. If it's not as much as that amount in the letter, that's fine. But he wants it to be a challenge to you. Can we stretch ourselves? Can we go beyond what would be convenient, what would be easy? And that may require for a time we have to postpone something we wanted to do. It may mean that we have to do something in a more simpler way than we'd expected to do it. But again, it needs to be something that is a sacrifice for us, so that we can be generous. We can support the works of the church, the works that we are obliged to do. When you get your letter, or for some will be coming to visit you face to face, I just ask you to prayerfully consider what God is calling you to do. And before you throw the letter in the trash or decide I'm not going to give, talk to God about it. What is God asking of you? How is God calling you to be generous? What is God wanting you to do? Once again, generosity is essential for us. We want to enter the kingdom of heaven. Generosity with our time, generosity with our treasures. God calls each of us to be generous.